You Don't Arrive with Anyone, and You Don't Leave with Anyone, Buddhism podcast. The very first time I went to stay with Ajaan Fuang, there was another young monk, a young man from Bangkok who had just ordained. His was one of those ordinations that had been forced on him by his fiancée. She had told him, "If you don't ordain for a couple of weeks, I don't want to marry you." So he ordained as a monk for a couple of weeks and discovered that he liked it a lot more than he had anticipated. The day before he was to return to Bangkok, he was beginning to doubt whether he wanted to return to lay life. That night, Ajaan Fuang gave a Dhamma talk on how when you come into this world, you don't come alone. You have your parents, you have other people who nursed you through life, raised you up, and so you have responsibilities to them. The next day, the young man went off, and a few days later disrobed in Bangkok. About a week later, I was beginning to feel bad about being a monk. I felt that I was being selfish and just looking out after myself. That night, Ajaan Fuang gave a Dhamma talk about how, when you come into this world, you come alone. You're responsible for your own birth, you're responsible for your own actions, and you're going to be responsible for how you die. Of course, these two contradictory messages simply showed how Ajaan Fuang could adapt his teachings to the needs of his audience. But of the two, I think the second teaching was ultimately the more true. When you come right down to it, there's a part of you that's totally alone as you come into the world, totally alone as you face your sufferings, totally alone as you leave here. Even when you are with other people, there's an internal dialogue that's just between you and yourself. That's what you've got to be responsible for. The world would be a nice place if we could provide for each other's happiness, and we can a little bit. But for the really deep down parts, we each have to be responsible for ourselves. If you constantly worry about this person and that person, no matter how close you are to them, there's going to be a part of you that gets neglected that you really are responsible for. Your true responsibility. This is a lot of what the Buddha's teaching is about, that you've got to take responsibility for yourself. Because who's making the decisions? You can't say, well, someone else made that decision for me, or this person made that decision for me, because there's got to be a part of you that decides to go along with those decisions for whatever reasons. So you have to look at those reasons. This is not to say that believing what other people say is bad. The Buddha never said that, but he says you have to take what other people say and look at what your mind says, and then examine both very carefully to see which is more appropriate, which really does correspond more closely to the way things are, the way things should be, the most skillful way of reacting to a particular set of circumstances. If you don't develop your own powers of mindfulness and alertness in these areas, your judgment is going to be clouded, and that's going to cloud your life. So this is your first responsibility right here. And fortunately, we do have the example of the Buddha to show us how it's done. When we talk about taking refuge in the Buddha, it's not that the Buddha is going to come down and do things for us. It means that he's given us an example of how people make their own decisions wisely, skillfully. If you stop to think about the story of his life, it's amazing. He did one of the things society really comes down hardest on. He left his wife right after she'd given birth to a child. I can't think of any society anywhere in the world that condones that. And yet, this is what he felt he had to do at that point. It turned out ultimately that his decision was right. He was able to come back and offer something priceless to his wife and to his child, Nibbana, arahantship. In the Therigatha, there's a poem attributed to his wife, in which she says that all the suffering was worth it because he showed her how to be responsible for herself and to settle all her internal issues as well. The same goes for Rahula. He was able to settle all his issues too. That's the highest gift you can give to other people, and you can't give it to them unless you've been able to settle all your issues first. So this is where your first responsibility lies. Straighten out the affairs in your own mind, and then you're in a position to be an example to others, to actually explain things to others in a way that they can benefit from. So when you're meditating, this is precisely what you're doing. You're taking on responsibility for your own mind. We're not sitting here waiting for someone to come in and inspire us, or for some light to come floating in that will suddenly clear things up for us. We have to do the work. This is what the teaching on skillfulness is about. If there's any one issue central to the Buddha's teachings, it's the issue of skillfulness. How do you develop a skill? All of his teachings revolve around that question. Take the Four Noble Truths. They deal with suffering and the end of suffering. What do you do to bring about the end of suffering? In other words, how do you arrange the issues in your mind skillfully so that they no longer lead to suffering? Even the Buddha's teaching on causality can be compared to modern theories about learning. He tells precisely why it is that people are able to learn. There are feedback loops you can learn from. You've got the quality of attention in your mind that focuses on this, focuses on that, asks questions, frames issues so that you can work on them. This is not the rote feedback of a thermostat. There's an element of attention and intention in there as well, all of which explains why we are able to learn. It's because we're able to learn that the teaching is useful for us. The Buddha teaches us how to frame our own questions. As we get more and more skillful about it, we begin to get a better and better sense of which questions in life are worth focusing on and which ones are best left aside, which ones are really important and which ones are only secondary. So when you're meditating, part of the issue is learning how to answer the proper questions. Why can't I see things clearly in my own mind? Why is everything a mess? Because the mind's not quiet enough. What do you do to make it more quiet? Work on this question. Then as the mind begins to settle down, what can you do when it attains a state of stillness? What have you done to get here? What do you do to keep here? As you get more and more stable in that particular level of stillness, is there still a level of suffering or stress in here? When the mind is really still, the word suffering doesn't really apply, but there is stress. Where is it? What goes along with it? So, the Buddha's teaching focuses on how to frame questions, for only when you frame the questions can you learn. That's why you look at your own mistakes, honestly and truly. The Buddha's first requisite in setting out the criteria for the type of person he was willing to teach was someone who is honest and no deceiver. In other words, someone who will recognize his or her own mistakes, admit them, and be willing to learn from them. You have to be able to ask, okay, what went wrong here? You start from the outside and then you take that question deeper and deeper into the mind. You begin to realize how many features of the mind's landscape are not given, but are actually the result of choices you have made. You begin to develop a sensitivity for which choices are skillful and which ones are not. Your inner landscape becomes a lot more malleable than you thought it could be. When you ask the right questions, everything gets turned around for the better. We're working on these two qualities needed to learn: intention and attention. The intention right now is to be mindful. Get the mind to settle down. Attention is watching. Is the intention really working or not? If it's not, what can you do to make it work better? This way, you learn how to bring these two qualities closer and closer together, more and more clearly as the mind grows more and more still. You can start making better choices. Then, as your level of skill grows really great, you can go beyond even right choices. Things genuinely begin to open up in the mind. You see that what the Buddha taught about is really there. There really is a deathless. There really is an unconditioned. When you get there, you realize that your own actions were what got you there. But at that point, even the sense of you doesn't even exist. But that doesn't matter, because what is there is the ultimate happiness, the ultimate well-being. You know what lead to it. That's what can be taught to other people. You do this, You do that. This is what worked. When you're talking in this way, you're talking with confidence. It's not just something you read in a book, not some theory you've dreamed up. It's something that actually worked inside you. Once you find something that worked inside you, you really have something special to offer other people. Your companionship with them is not just the kind of companionship that's desperately trying to make up for the big hole of loneliness that each of us tends to carry around inside. You've been able to work through that lonely hole in yourself, so it's not lonely anymore. It's no longer a hole. You're coming from a sense of fullness. That's when you have something really outside of the ordinary to share with people. So this is what's meant by taking responsibility for yourself, for that gnawing sense inside that something is wrong, something is lacking. You look into it to see exactly where it is. You discover that what it comes down to is a huge lack of attention, lack of awareness of what's going on inside, a kind of a bewilderment. The Buddha said that's one of the two ways we react to suffering. First, there's a sense of bewilderment. How does this happen? Then there's a search for somebody else to help show you the way out. Most of us put those two qualities together in very unskillful ways. But when you learn how to put them together in a skillful way, bewilderment turns into articulate questions. The search for someone who can help focuses on someone who can really act as an example for what you can do. You've got the Buddha, the Noble Sangha. So once you take those two qualities of bewilderment and search and begin to use them skillfully, you get to the point where you really have ended the problem of suffering in the mind in all of its manifestations. From that point on, when you're looking to other people, you're not looking for them to solve your suffering for you. Instead, you're in a position where your presence is a gift to them. You can do your best to help them to turn their own bewilderment and search in skillful directions. But the help can be really helpful only when you've taken care of your issues first. Those are the issues you've been carrying around for you don't know how long. Those are the issues that each of us has been carrying around for eons and eons, and this is the only way to work through them. The burden in the mind finally gets lifted. That's when you've taken care of what really is your responsibility. From that point on, everything else is purely a gift. A culture of self-reliance. When you practice the Dhamma, you're taking on a new culture. And it's not Asian culture, it's what the Buddha called the customs of the noble ones. Because even in Asia, when people are practicing, if they are really serious about the practice, they have to go against a lot of the customs that they grew up with. We tend to think of the forest tradition as embedded in Thai culture, and to some extent it is. But it's good to remember that when Ajaan Fuang was starting out, he was often attacked, criticized for not following Thai customs. He didn't live the way most Thai monks lived. He didn't eat or dress the way most Thai monks ate or dressed. When people would criticize him to his face, he'd say, "I'm not interested in Thai customs or Lao customs or the customs of any country, because those are the customs of people with defilements. They're not the customs that lead to awakening." He wanted to find the customs of the noble ones and live by those customs so that he could become a noble one as well. This is a tradition that goes way back. One of the traditional stories in the commentaries is of the Buddha returning to his home after his awakening. The very first day after he got there, early in the morning, he went out for alms. His father, a noble warrior, was very upset because nobody in their family lineage had ever done anything like this. So he went out to criticize the Buddha. The Buddha replied, "I'm not a member of that lineage anymore. I'm a member of the lineage of the noble ones, and this is one of the customs of the noble ones, to go for alms." It's important that we think about this as we practice, because a very large part of our mind, a very large factor in our habits, comes from the customs we grew up with. And we live in a society where the customs are based on defilement. So much of the mass media, so many of the books and magazines, TV shows, movies, are aimed at increasing our defilements, So a lot of our conversation with other people falls in line with those influences. Our interactions with other people are colored by those views, by those values. There comes a point when you're practicing the Dhamma that you realize that your values have become different. You've stepped out of society, you've stepped out of the dominant culture. Then there's the question of how to still live in that culture, how to negotiate the relationship. Your basic motto is, as they say on those Christian decals, not of this world. You live in the world, but you're not of the world. In other words, your values for yourself, your attitudes about what you're going to do and what you are going to say, have to stay in line with the customs of the noble ones. You have to protect that part of your mind, protect that part of your practice. Don't allow anybody to make inroads on it. There are basically 4 values. The first 3 have to do with contentment. Contentment with whatever food comes your way, contentment with whatever clothing comes your way, contentment with whatever shelter comes your way. Learning to have a sense of enough that you don't need all that much in order to be happy. The 4th principle has to do with discontent, that you take delight in developing, you take delight in abandoning. Here, of course, it means developing skillful qualities of mind and abandoning unskillful ones. Developing skillful words and deeds and abandoning unskillful ones. Being discontent in the sense of seeing that there's always room for improvement, or at the very least, making sure that you don't lose whatever qualities you already have. It's not just that you follow these values. The Buddha adds that you have to see the dangers of being proud about them. We're not doing this to make ourselves better than other people. We're doing these things because we see that our minds are suffering and the dominant values of the culture are not helping. They're increasing our suffering. So you need to develop a sense of independence. You need to have a sense of self-reliance as you maintain these values, keeping in mind the fact that you're doing it, because the mind has its illnesses, the mind has its diseases, and you need to treat them. So you don't make a show of your practice. It would be like making a show of the medicine you have to take because you're sick. You do the practice quietly. Simply internalize as much of the Dhamma as you can. This is where the concept of refuge comes in. On the one hand, we're taught to take the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha as our refuge. You always try to keep them in mind. The word sarana, refuge, also means something you remember, something you hold in mind. For instance, we hold in mind the life of the Buddha. As we live our lives, there is always a narrative that we're patterning our lives on, someone we may have admired when we were younger, or something from the typical narrative of the culture. But it's good to keep the Buddha's narrative in mind as well. Someone who could have spent his life immersed in sensual pleasures, but he didn't. He could have spent his life in self-torment, extreme asceticism, but he didn't. Instead, he found the middle way that led to true happiness inside, a deathless happiness, a happiness that doesn't depend on any conditions at all. And he was able to do it not because he was some special divine being, but because he took the issue of happiness really seriously, and he developed whatever qualities of mind were needed. So you want to keep that fact in mind to keep the narrative of your life in perspective. Similarly with the Dhamma and the Sangha, there is a path of practice, and the Sangha, the noble Sangha, shows that it yields results. That noble Sangha is not just composed of monks and nuns. There are a lot of laymen and laywomen who have followed the Dhamma and found that what the Buddha said is true. So, when taking refuge in the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha, you're trying to keep these things in mind so as to keep the issues of your life in perspective. What's important? What's not important? Where you can make compromises? Where you can't. But the refuge becomes true only when you can internalize it. This is why those customs of the noble ones are really helpful. The more self-reliant you are in terms of being able to make do with whatever food, clothing, and shelter come your way, the less you're worried about what people think about you, how you look in the eyes of others. That way, you're free to focus more of your attention on developing your inner refuge. The freedom that comes from contentment with external things also gives you perspective on what work to take on to make your living. You just need enough in order to be able to practice. Most of the jobs that go beyond that also take a lot of time and a lot of energy, making it harder to practice. So there is a trade-off. You look for your sustenance in terms of the qualities of mind you can develop. You learn how to feed, as the Buddha says, on rapture, like the radiant gods. Develop good, strong concentration, which he compared to rice, beans, honey, butter, good food for the mind. The more you can feed your mind on these qualities, the easier it is to live with less and less outside, which makes you have a smaller footprint. You're a lot more self-reliant. There is a greater and greater sense of independence. Once I was helping to teach a group retreat, and one evening after giving a talk, one of the retreatants went back to his room, and as he told me the next morning, he realized that he was really angry with me. He told me about it the next morning. I said, "Oh, what made you angry?" He said, "All the time you've been here, I've never been able to figure out where your buttons are." I said, "That's why we wear robes." I meant that in two ways. One, you can't see my buttons because they're all covered by the robes. But two, by wearing robes, I have fewer needs in terms of clothing. Because I have fewer needs, I have fewer buttons that people can see that they can push. But this principle doesn't apply just to monks. It applies to lay people as well. You keep your needs to a minimum, you're less tied to what other people think about you or want out of you, because you want less out of them. So the customs of the noble ones are customs of self-reliance, customs of independence. After all, we are looking for freedom, and it doesn't come only at the end of the path. We try to find what freedom we can on the path as well. Freedom means responsibility. It entails the need to be self-reliant. Fortunately, we don't have to keep reinventing the Dhamma wheel every day. We do have the example of the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha to give us guidance, to give us support as we internalize their example so that the mind really can become its own refuge. Atahi atano natho. The self is its own mainstay. It becomes its mainstay when it's well trained. As long as you need outside help, keep looking to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha for your inspiration, for your support, for your nourishment. This will provide you with the environment you need to keep your values straight, keep your priorities straight so that the customs of defilement don't overwhelm you, don't eat away at your practice. It's bad enough that you've got defilements in your own mind, so you want to be able to resist as much as possible the influence of defilements from outside, the things that feed defilement from outside, regardless of what the dominant culture says. Less is more. We spread thoughts of goodwill for all the world, that we don't wish anyone any harm. We wish that all beings could find happiness. So why are we sitting here with our eyes closed? Why aren't we going out there, making people happy? Because happiness is something that has to come from within. It's based on being skillful in the way you act, which includes not only your physical actions, but also your speech and the actions of your mind, and in particular, the act of intention. This is because it's through our intentions that we shape the world we experience, along with the amount of pleasure or pain we take out of that experience. To formulate intentions that really do lead to happiness is a skill. And because it's a skill, nobody else can master the skill for you. You can't master the skill for anyone else. You can give other people advice. You can show them to some extent how to do things. But for them to find happiness requires that they take the issue of happiness seriously, that they learn how to be skillful in their approach to happiness. If you're going to give them reliable advice or set a reliable example, you yourself need to learn how to be skillful too. So, both for the sake of our own true happiness and for the true happiness of others, this is why we're sitting here meditating. We're training the mind to be very attentive, continually attentive to what it's doing, so that it can learn how to do it skillfully. This means that even though there is the quest for peace, the quest for stillness in the mind, it's not just peace and stillness for its own sake. It's for the sake of understanding what we're doing to cause suffering and what we can do to stop it. That's the purpose of our understanding. Last week I was teaching up in Canada, and the question came up, isn't the purpose of all this practice to find the ultimate truth about things? And the answer is no. We're trying to find a particular truth that's useful for a higher purpose, the purpose of true happiness. It's truth with a purpose. After all, there are many truths of the world. We can talk about how lasting things are, and in some ways it's true. We can talk about how ephemeral they are, and in some ways that's true as well. We can talk about the happiness in relationships, and there really is happiness in relationships. But we can also talk about the suffering in relationships, and there's a lot of that too. The question is, what use comes from focusing on which truths? Where do they lead you? Once when I was first staying with Ajaan Fuang, there was another young monk who had ordained at his fiancée's request. She wanted to make sure her husband had had some training as a monk before they got married. So he spent 2 weeks out there at the monastery and found that he liked the life of a monk a lot more than he had expected. When the night came for his parents and fiancée to pick him up and take him back to disrobe in Bangkok, Ajaan Fuang could sense that he was getting a little reluctant to go. So that night he gave a talk on how we're not born alone. We're born from our parents. We owe a debt to our parents, and we need to repay that debt. A few days later, I was beginning to get concerned about my own debt to my father, and Ajaan Fuang said, "When we come to this world, we come alone. Nobody comes with us. Nobody hired us to come." 2 different truths, both true, and the question is learning how to use those truths properly in the right context, which means that the uses of these truths are what's important. The ultimate use is finding out how we create a lot of unnecessary stress and suffering for ourselves in spite of ourselves, and how we can put an end to it. That's why we train the mind. To see this clearly, we have to get the mind still. Get the mind with one object so it can settle down and have a good solid foundation that doesn't shift around all the time. The more you shift around, the less you see. You might think that the more territory you cover, the more sights, sounds, smells, tastes, and tactile sensations you'll see. But you don't see them clearly. And the memory of what you do see is very impermanent. When you try to gather up that kind of wealth, the wealth of memories and experiences, you find that it doesn't stay with you. It's like buying a huge shipload of lettuce, thinking it'll supply you with all the lettuce you'll need for the rest of your life. And of course, the lettuce begins to rot pretty fast, and after a while you can't use it. You then have the burden of trying to throw it away, so you need to get a different kind of knowledge, the kind of knowledge that doesn't change. You find that it doesn't require you to know a lot of things outside, but it does require you to know your mind very thoroughly. How does your mind process things? That's where the stress and suffering come from. The Buddha explains the causes of stress and suffering in a very elaborate sequence. It starts with ignorance and goes through many different factors. But one obvious point to notice is that many of the factors come prior to your sensory experience. In other words, the issue is all about what you bring to the experience. That's what makes all the difference. This is why we train the mind, so that it can bring the right qualities, the right intentions, the right attention, paying attention to where there's stress, and what can you do to put an end to it by focusing on what you did to cause it. That kind of knowledge is useful in all circumstances, for it enables you to bring the right attitudes, the right qualities to bear, no matter what the situation. So we start out here with our eyes closed, sitting still, to get the mind to settle down so that we can see it, so that we can develop some of these skills. But these skills are not just to be used when sitting here with our eyes closed. They're for us to bring to any situation no matter what, no matter how complex, no matter how large and complicated. If we can bring the right attitudes to those situations, we don't have to suffer. We don't have to cause suffering for other people. They may not like what we say or do, because we can't have any control over people's likes and dislikes, which are pretty unreliable. But we can be firm in our intent not to cause anyone any harm. This is the kind of knowledge, and these are the kind of truths we're looking for. The truth of what you're doing right now. What is your intention right now? Is it a skillful intention? And skillful doesn't mean just good, because you can have good intentions for others, but you can also have a lot of delusion at the same time, in which case your intention is not really skillful. When you're looking for skillful intentions, you're looking for intentions that aren't founded on greed, aren't founded on aversion, and aren't founded on delusion. That's what you're working for. That means you have to start with something immediately present and really obvious, like the breath. Just be with the breath as it comes in. Be with the breath as it goes out. Part of the mind will complain that there's not much happening, but the more space you give to the breath, the more you see what's there. In other words, you don't want to clutter up your mind with other thoughts. You have to realize in this case that less is more. The fewer things you're thinking about, the more you'll see right here, right now. So, whatever other concerns you may have about your situation at home, at work, or the world outside, put those concerns aside for the time being. Be as fully aware of the body, as fully aware of the breath as you can right now. Think of the breath as a whole body process. It's not just the air coming in and out of the lungs. It's the flow of energy throughout the body, part of which is related to the flow of the blood and to the sense of aliveness in your nerves. Try to be sensitive to the whole body as you breathe in and breathe out. Notice if there's any tension or tightness in any part of the body. Allow it to relax. If there's a sense of nourishment and refreshment, allow that to expand. Ask yourself, what would be the most refreshing way to breathe right now? See how the body responds, and stick with it, trying to stay on top of the body's breath needs and providing whatever you sense it needs with each and every breath. Because it's in sticking with the breath that the mind develops some steadiness. Once your gaze is steady, it can begin to see other movements in the mind as they happen. But for the time being, you don't want to pay them any attention. You want to pay attention more to the movements of the breath. If there are any thoughts coming up, you can just let them go. Let them go. Let them go. Again, less is more. The fewer the thoughts cluttering up your awareness, the more you'll sense how the breath can fill the range of your awareness. The more sensitive you are, the more likely the mind is to settle down, to have a sense of ease and well-being right here, right now. Comb through any tangles of tension in the body, any knots of blockage in the breath. The more demanding you are in not allowing the tension to stay, the more subtleties you'll see. It's like being the princess who couldn't even have a pea under many mattresses. The difference here being that if you sense any little peas under the mattress, you take them out. That's the work at the beginning of the meditation. Ironing things out, smoothing things out, asking questions about the breath. What kind of breathing would feel good now? And what would feel good now? Because sometimes you can breathe in a way that stays steadily the same for long periods of time, and the body feels fine. At other times, one type of breathing might feel good for a couple breaths, and then not so good with the next breath, so you've got to change. The important thing is that you stay with the breath as your main topic, to develop what is called singleness of preoccupation, which means both that you hold to one preoccupation, the breath, and you make it single in the sense that it's the one thing that fills the whole range of your awareness, with breath energy flowing through the body, even around the body. Think of it as a cocoon around the body, protecting you from outside energies. See how long you can maintain that perception. It's an act of balancing. If you've ever noticed people walking across a tightrope, you notice that they don't stay perfectly balanced all the time. They shift a little bit to the right, a little bit to the left, and then they correct, like those old-fashioned scales that swing back and forth before finally coming into balance. If something tips it in one direction, the scale corrects itself, swinging back and forth until it's in balance again. The ability to regain your balance is what's going to keep you here. Our mind is often like the mind of an addict, the sort of person who says, "I've been smoking pot for the last 5 years, but now I'm totally clean, totally beyond that. I'll never be tempted to smoke again." That kind of attitude is going to get him back into smoking pot pretty soon. The way to stay away from your addiction is to realize that there are certain things that attract you, so you have to be on your guard, armed with antidotes for every temptation. You need to have antidotes to bring yourself back into balance. So realize that there's always a possibility of falling out of balance, but you can master the skills that can get you back in. That's what the directed thought and evaluation at the beginning of right concentration are all about. If you find the mind slipping off the breath, you can get it back right away. If it slips off in another direction, you get it back right away. You keep regaining your balance no matter how much it wobbles. After a while, things finally settle down. You get more and more absorbed in the breath. There's a greater sense of oneness, a greater sense of concentration, composure, assurance that this is where you really want to be, and it's all right where it is right now. At that point, you don't have to adjust or analyze the breath anymore. Just stay with full body breath, whole body breath, aware, aware. It's as if the awareness and the body and the breath penetrate one another. There's a strong sense of oneness. It's from this oneness that we can begin to see things clearly. The important thing right now is just to make sure that your foundation is strong and that you do whatever is needed to maintain and regain that sense of balance. You may find the mind going into its old habits of trying to gather up this, gather up that. So remember, less is more. Just the breath, just the breath. You don't need anything else. If you give a lot of attention to the breath, you begin to see its potentials and can take advantage of them. You find that a sense of ease and well-being with the breath can do a lot more for you than any amount of status, material gain, praise, outside pleasures, any of the ways of the world. A sense of ease and well-being that come from within. This is really all you need because it fully nourishes the mind right now. A well-nourished mind gives rise to more mindfulness and ultimately to the knowledge that can put an end to defilement, which is an even greater example of the case that less is more. The fewer your defilements, the more freedom you have. As the Buddha said, when he gained awakening, he dwelled with an unrestricted awareness, free from any attachments, free from any constriction. It's the greatest wealth there is.